Hello and welcome. I'm Uwe Schulte, the head of the Global Sustainability Center of the Conference Board, and I welcome you to our new webcast, Sustainability Leadership for 2020 and Beyond. Let me introduce our guests to you. First of all, Dr. Franz Volgon. She leads the global sustainability team at Leo Pharma, a multinational healthcare company based in Denmark. She has over 15 years experience in sustainability leadership and strategy in the private sector, policy advocacy, civil society, and academia. Her expertise is on issues of social performance, inclusive economic growth and societal impact, responsible sourcing, human rights, transparency, and sustainability community development. Previously, she worked at Ørsted, BSR, and the Danish Institute for International Studies, and holds a doctorate in political anthropology from Lund University in Sweden. Welcome, Franz.
Thank you, Uwe. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Great. And I would also like to introduce Anu Sausch. He leads our sustainability research practice in the Conference Board Sustainability Center for Europe. He started his career as an environment strategy consultant and then transitioned into corporate sustainability roles, where he has experience in leading and delivering sustainability strategy, supply chain, circular economy, and low carbon programs. Anu's previous roles include positions at international professional service firms PricewaterhouseCoopers and with the low carbon energy group EDF. Before we get started, I would like to give you a few hints on the logistics of this webcast. You can ask questions, and we really encourage you to do this at any point in time. Please use the chat box, which you find at the bottom left-hand side of your screen. The presentation you can download from the middle box, and if you at any point in time would like to use full screen mode, on the top right you find 4 arrows pointing in all 4 directions. When you click on it, you see full screen mode, and if you click again, then you're back to this layout. You can share this webcast with your colleagues at any point in time later on. It will be recorded, and then it is available on demand. That should be possible latest by Monday, probably already tomorrow. You can earn professional development credits, CPD and CPE. For that, you have to type in your full name and email address in the space provided. And when the pop-ups appear on the screen, you have to click OK, and you have to stay online for the entire webcast. It is surely obvious that this feature is only available on the live webcast and not on the demand version. As I said, this is a webcast series organized by the Global Sustainability Center of the Conference Board. And in the center, we support all member companies to create long-term value and positive impact through sustainability integration, which will be the subject of today's discussion as well. We try to do this by timely, hopefully thought-provoking, and hopefully relevant research. And we are guided by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and responsible business standards. We strive to be fact-based and independent. And with that, I would like to get us started. And I'm so pleased to have Franz with us from Leo Pharma. And I would like to get you into the mode by asking, when you look at the turn of events which we have been through over the last few months, what did that mean for you as a sustainability leader in your company?
Great. Thank you, Uwe. And I think it's a very pertinent question to get the discussion started on the theme of today's webcast, which is looking also at sustainability strategy and integration. I think before I get into sort of the COVID response and what it means to sustainability, I'd like to just frame where Leo Pharma is at in terms of its sustainability strategy, because I think that's important to contextualize also how we interpret the turn of events and how it's going to inform decisions going forward. Leo Pharma is a small, mid-sized pharma company specializing in medical dermatology. And I think that that's important as well because we're looking at chronic non-communicable diseases. We're privately owned, foundation owned here in Denmark, so we don't have investors, and that's important also from a sustainability performance because we don't have some of that investor pressure that a lot of other companies do. At the same time, what it really offers us is an opportunity to focus on what it is that we want to focus on and what we need to focus on from a sustainability perspective. I've been with the company for 2 years and I was brought in to develop a strategic forward-looking sustainability strategy. Prior to that, the company was very much focused on implementing sustainability initiatives that were largely aligned with the reporting disclosure laws here in Denmark and largely focused around sort of your first generation sustainability priorities, largely focused around responsible business. And what we've been moving the company towards is a much more strategic approach that's really looking at what is core to our business and where is it that sustainability could bring the most value to our business and to society. And if you look at this sort of, very simplistic visual, by no means is this earth-shattering in a sustainability strategy, but it doesn't need to be either. We're a healthcare company. Health is our business. Health is a societal priority. It goes without saying that the priority for our sustainability strategy will focus on how is it that we can improve patient health outcomes and really have a strong focus around sustainable development goal number 3. In order for us to really claim a position on health, we need to rest on a strong foundation of responsibility. So this is really the area, what are the issues that we need to get right? That obviously spans across your, sort of people, planet, ethics pillars as well. And so that's really how we've structured our work going forward. And right now we're working across the business to really set goals and clear roadmaps for taking this forward to 2030 in alignment to our new corporate strategy and how is it that we can have sustainability really contribute to some of those growth outcomes. The reason why I think that it's important to contextualize our COVID reaction to this is twofold. One is the focus on health, and COVID obviously being a health crisis globally. The second, I will also speak to the question of where we are in terms of implementing that strategy. And we're really in the initial days of setting these corporate goals. And in that sense, it created a lot of opportunities for us as well. To your question then, Uwe, on COVID response, I think when this really took off in Europe about 4 months ago, our immediate focus was on the short term and the now. It was really focused on internal reactions to COVID, ensuring employees are safe, doing a risk assessment around our production. How is it that we understand business continuity risk? What does it mean to the potential business, but in a very immediate response. That quickly evolved once things were under control to we're a healthcare company. How is it that we can help? There were certainly calls to companies globally, but especially as a healthcare company, where is it that some of our core business functions could be used? And we did an evaluation of what it is that we could contribute, looking at our lab space, our testing space, and again, we made a deliberate decision that we would engage in COVID response in terms of health and what was most core to our business. Some of the initiatives that we did engage in is we donated our molecular library, for instance, or we gave free access to it rather, so that there would be full transparency on what it is that we had in our molecular library to see if there was anything of interest in terms of finding a medical solution to COVID. We have a lot of medically trained staff, which we encourage to volunteer for different health organizations here in Denmark and other geographies where we're present as well. We also wanted to ensure that our clinical trials could keep running because there will be an after COVID. And as a healthcare company, we need to ensure that our patients can continuously have access to the healthcare that they need. And so how is it that we could secure some of those clinical trial processes and ensure that those could be ongoing and make sure that those the patients in those were remaining safe. We were also looking in some of the geographies that had some of the strictest lockdowns on how could we enable remote delivery of healthcare product and treatment for some of these patients that we're treating on dermatological diseases that we treat, or these chronic non-communicable diseases that patients are living with for large portions of their lives. So really looking at sort of reactive initiatives that were assessed on a fit for purpose basis based on different geographies, but very much focused on what's core to our strategy, which is access to health in a broad sense. Again, sort of going into that journey of once those initiatives were well on their way, what does this mean to us in a long-term perspective? And this goes back to where I was saying we're just on the cusp of defining some of our goals corporate-wide and creating this alignment around some of our health initiatives across the company. So in that sense, it's an opportunity because COVID will leave its mark in our industry. We could see how health systems that were constrained to begin with are ever more constrained. We've seen how chronic conditions have been deprioritized just on a daily basis in terms of patients going to see their general practitioner. Patient mobility in that sense has been decreased both by lockdown measures, but also in terms of GPs and healthcare providers putting different restrictions on who can come in and how are we going to address patient concerns around some of these health issues. So that's what I'm saying. In a sense, we have an opportunity because we can see that there is a post-COVID response that we need to adhere to. And obviously, our main focus in our strategy is how is it that we can address access, and access in a broad sense. The debate around health access has evolved considerably over the last 10 years. I think if we look back, where it started was really focused around communicable diseases, tropical diseases in developing countries. And now it's really anchored itself as a discussion that is important everywhere. It is important in Europe and North America. And COVID has really brought that attention in terms of how is it that healthcare systems, where are some of the challenges and some of the barriers there. So really for us, this is an opportunity to rethink what are going to be some of the constraints to us going forward. And I think that we're certainly going to face new ones, given that we are in chronic non-communicable diseases, but also really bringing to the fore what are some of the solutions to some of these well-entrenched barriers to health access, be it disease awareness, be it barriers to treatment, be it issues around cost and health system strengthening and so on. So going back to sort of your original question there, Uwe, I think for us as the sustainability team, it was being able to adapt to both the immediate needs of what the crisis brought to us. And then as we progressed, we were able to see, well, what does this mean in terms of a long-term perspective? What does it mean in terms of pandemic preparedness for us? What if there were to be such a pandemic in our disease areas, for instance, would we be ready? And really bringing us to a point now of how is it that we can use our sustainability strategy to really help create business resiliency going forward and align with some of our corporate goals. So it's been quite an interesting journey, but also quite a pertinent one directly related to this.
Thanks, Francis. Let me just ask you a question because I'm not a healthcare expert. When you talk about barriers to access, give me a couple of examples.
Okay, there could be many. It could be anything, the way we would term it largely is anything that would sort of create obstacles or prevent someone in need of a medical service to get the services they need. So it could be anything from lack of awareness of diseases, stigma. It could be policies, directives in terms of who gets access to dermatological care. And in our case, what are some of the directives in order to get you from a GP specialist, prescriptions, access to more advanced, innovative medicines, access to clinical trials, all just because I mentioned it as something that we really want to secure is an important one because, it's a big time commitment for patients and they need to be able to have access to it, both in terms of their awareness, but to physically be able to get there and how is it that we can use digital technologies to overcome some of those barriers so that we could be much more inclusive in terms of who can have access to some of these treatments.
So,
those are just
for example,
examples.
if a certain healthcare insurance doesn't cover certain diseases, that would be a barrier as well. Yeah.
Precisely, yeah. Or certain types of medicines, and what are some of the prescription guidelines, but also, for instance, awareness at the general practitioner level, because that's really the first point of contact. Or in some considers even nurses, if you're looking at more remote areas, there may not be enough dermatological services within a given area to capture population.
No, thanks a lot. I mean, you've given an impressive story about the journey. First, attend the urgent needs, and then take the learnings on COVID. We're going to go into the more general area now of sustainability integration. So for our audience, if you have questions for Franz on the subject of COVID, please feel free to put them on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, and then we can deal with it. Whilst you consider your questions, and we will cover them as we go along. I'm very pleased that we have Anu, our senior researcher from the conference board, here with us as well. And Anu, I understand you recently undertook a study exploring the topic of sustainability integration specifically. Can you talk a little bit about that? What were your major findings?
Sure. Thank you, Franz. Before I do that, I think so you mentioned some really nice words when you were responding. I think you talked about long-term perspective. You talked about scenarios. How can you think through what's future holding? How can you use that to guide your responses, guide your strategy now? And of course, you ended up with resilience. I guess before, Uwe, I go into the detail about sustainability integration, I just want to set it out, I guess. Every now and then, I think that has been the narrative until now, that sustainability, often the narrative which goes along is that a business cannot pursue sustainable business practices and still be profitable. Until now, often, it's been always posed as an either or, a paradox of contradiction. And I think so the narrative needs to change. There's so many numerous studies which confirm that, they go hand in hand. Sustainable businesses can be profitable, are profitable. And I think this is the shift which we are seeing, which we find it's the shift from either or to the and going hand in hand. So I just want to set it out up front. And again, with the COVID narrative, of course, businesses were at risk. They had to ensure they address the immediate needs. But at the same time, you cannot forget what's actually underlying. And what we've seen, the narrative, at least here in Europe, which is very clear amongst our member companies, and you look at some of the other publications which are coming out, the call for green recovery, the call for ensuring that everything we do from now on, sustainability is embedded at the core, is very, very important. So I just want to, put it out up front as something which companies can reflect on, our listeners can reflect on. But at the same time, of course, we talk about integration, we talk about, having an embedded approach. But the key question is, how do companies do that? In terms of what we did, we interviewed chief sustainability officers around 12 different companies, global companies in Europe. And we then actually looked at some of the principles which came out from there. There are 7 factors we picked out. And let me start from the one which I feel is, most important, is actually reframing the business model. The whole notion of how does a company make money, but actually more importantly, why does it exist? And I think that's a key questions which companies which you spoke to have actually answered. They've been actually reflected upon the mirror, saying, why do they exist? What's their purpose? And more importantly, actually having an appreciation that you cannot achieve any transformation by just looking at the periphery of your organizations. You need to start from the core and then actually understand that profits is not the end goal, but will be an outcome when you start to create value for all stakeholders. That's number one. When we look at, I'm just looking at the inner ring first. The second factor, we talk about materiality. when you look at sustainability issues, of course, and I think that Franz also very, I appreciate the honesty when you mentioned that, your sustainability journey started off responding to the various reporting frameworks. How do you go about addressing those things? I guess a lot of companies still are on that journey. Is addressing the long list of ESG issues is not going to burn the ocean. Companies really have to think through from a lens of what are the most important issues where they can have an impact, and similarly what sustainability issues can impact their business, and use that to refine, identify a few areas where they can actually say this is what we're going to address as part of a long-term strategy. So being really selective and focused to have maximum value creation and impact. Going on, and I think that now if you look at, I'll take the example of climate change. When you talk about big ambitious goals, we see the direction of travel is net neutral, and a lot of companies are committing to that. Some companies have already achieved it, or saying they'll be net neutral by 2025, all the way through their supply chain and everything else, so all going to scope 3. And some companies are progressively saying 2030, 2040, or 2050. Now let's imagine there's a global company who says they put out a commitment saying we'll be net neutral by year 2100. Now, where does that fit into all of the schemes you're talking about? Given the challenges, given what we face, there has to be big leadership, because then that's an important thing of which is related to the outer ring. We look at that is how do you engage your employees? Imagine a company goes out and says we'll be net neutral by 2100. How will the employees feel about this, especially day and today, where actually people are looking for meaning, they want inspiration, and they want to be part of a journey of something just bigger than getting a paycheck at the end of the day. So big ambitious goals are really important, because that puts you out, it sets out the real tone of which you can actually work with others to make that happen. The other two is around the middle ring, which is about engaging your employees as well as not doing it alone. And the principles around it is, of course, is if companies were to have, a lot of companies do have still today, sustainability functions, you cannot delegate the responsibility of sustainability to a handful of people or a function. It has to be embedded within the organization. And I think so different companies have gone through a different way about achieving this. But that's actually very, very important, because you just not rely on a few people, but you rely on everyone to be on the journey to realize your goals. And of course, when we look at the connected nature of sustainability issues, the need, and I think so, the need to have a systemic response to a lot of the issues which we face. Brave companies can, of course, go out and say, we will try to do it alone. You will have much more possibilities, synergies, where you actually are working with others to make those goals a reality. So, just working in collaboration with your peers from within your sector or other sectors. Which brings me on to the outer ring about, there's two aspects over here. The first one is governance. And what we found, the companies we spoke to, is they have actually made a transition from describing how sustainability is governed, because that's the emphasis a lot of companies, rightly so. I mean, I guess you need that. You need to be able to describe how sustainability is governed. But what they have done is they have moved away from actually having a narrative which says this is how sustainability is governed, but this is how it is used to guide our strategy. This is how we are using it to inform decisions, the long-term sustainability decisions. So that's a little subtle shift, but it's very, very important, and that's the kind of the next phase for companies to consider and embark on. And lastly, we talk about all of these things, and I think we've talked about it before a number of times. How can you actually communicate all of these things in a transparent, concise manner, which talks about the material issues, the really important ones, but also talks about the impact, also talks about the value your company is creating, and not just a historic perspective, but more of a forward-looking perspective. And companies, of course, are on a journey, but they need to be actually thinking, how can I actually make all of these things happen? So this is what we found in our study. I've just given a very brief, quick overview. We have also made the file available for our listeners so they can download the short report which we put out, which has got about 6 or 8 company case examples for them to look at.
Thank you so much, Anu. And if you wonder where you find that file, you find it on our website, but you find it here in the box next to the question box. I see that some of you have started typing questions, and we're looking forward to receiving them. First of all, I would like to ask Franz, when you listen to what Anu just said, does that resonate with you, or is it sort of in a parallel universe?
No, of course. I mean, certainly, and I have some reflections that I'd like to share with you on this and on this model, because I think it's a great guide, and I think that we need to also look at this. Well, what does this mean in practice, and how is it that we can work with such a model? I think the first point we hear a lot in the sustainability space on the either or, right? On the sustainability versus profitability, and how do we get that to an end, and so on. And I think we're really moving to a space where what does integration mean? We often hear sometimes these notions that success is when you've integrated yourself out of a job and that it's fully embedded. And quite frankly, I disagree. I think that we expect everybody in the company to comply with the law. We don't get rid of our legal counsel either. So I think that there should forever be a core function in sustainability, but certainly the truth is that its success is inextricably linked to its capacity to embed itself across core functions and working collaboratively. And that really links to how is it that you're governed and set up. I think that also on this notion of the sort of this binary either or and integration, I increasingly hear, we have a sustainability strategy. We sometimes build it in a silo and then try to retrofit it or integrate into corporate strategy. There's a slight variation on that. Is our sustainability strategy is part of the corporate strategy. We're still playing on the binary. I think that, when we get to the point that we have a corporate strategy or that we have a sustainable business strategy, full stop, is really when we're going to start seeing integration, and I think some companies are more there, and we're working towards that. But I think that we really need to start looking at this as how is it that we create strategy, and not have integration as an activity that needs to be done per se. I think, when we refer to business models, I think that's important to take on as a practitioner, because that can scare people in terms of, reframing business models. It looks like we're going to revolutionize the business. And some of the examples in the report are some of the greatest success stories of the, great transformational change that we've seen in companies. And I think those are great, inspiring stories. But I think the point of having business model at the core is really about that of looking at what is your business about and how is it that you can leverage your core business functions in order to create greater value, both for your business, but also that societal value and that impact and that greater focus on impact. And not every company will be, completely transforming itself, nor does it need to. But it's really about looking at how can you innovate certain practices, how can you innovate certain partnerships, to think of things differently, of where is it that you could accentuate your impact or get greater impact from what it is that you're doing. So, while I really like the idea of sort of reframing and looking at innovative business models, and that's a great ambition to have, I think it mustn't scare people away either. I think the core is the crux of this is really that you should be questioning and informing your core business practices and core business functions through a sustainability lens. And going back to this notion, as I said, how is it that we create a sustainable business strategy, so to speak? And I think that, we set big, ambitious goals. Yes, they need to be important. We need to have impact. I think that we need to be careful in comparability because companies are different. I often get this question on climate, for instance, and I say, well, yeah, but somebody else's climate target also just means that maybe their business looks different. So we really need to figure out what is right for us as a business, but bear in mind sort of the purpose of a goal is really to drive performance. Just a couple of last little points before you open it up to the questions from our participants. I think, going back to this notion of impact and goals and can't do it alone. Yes, we need to integrate across the business, and employee engagement is obviously a big part of that and important in terms of that embeddedness piece, because they're the ones who can come up with initiatives that are maybe not strategic, but that bring it to life to them and can have sort of a more personal meaning towards sustainability. I think that this is also where governance gets really important, because we need a good governance structure in order to make sure that we have alignment across core business functions and that our budgets are prioritized adequately to make sure that our ambitions are met. I think that if we don't have the right level of governance in practice, we simply will not be effective. I think that one of the challenges we face, though, and sort of speaks to your climate example, is that what often is visible or what is tangible and easily accessible from a broad employee base is not always what is most impactful. And where we're looking at sometimes having the most impact is in something that's a little bit more opaque or difficult to understand. And I think that in order for us to really have effective strategies, we need to get that balance right. To simplify it, it's, we could have great efforts to reduce our carbon footprint that are very technical, and we're looking with our engineering teams and how we're processing and so on. But if we're leaving the lights on all the time, it's going to confuse employees. At the same time, if we keep it too simplistic a level, we're not having the impact that we want. And that's sort of one of the focus areas that we need to really spend time with on how do we get that balance. So, just some reflections on a model that I think certainly resonates very strongly with trying to mature a sustainability practice and getting all the pieces of the puzzle to work in concept. And I hope that just some of my comments can help people understand in terms of how could you take this model and really bring it to your company and start implementing
it. We actually have, thank you so much. And I really understand your point about impact and your point about not scaring people away, but making sure that we all understand that what it means to look at the core of what the business is all about. We have two separate areas of question at the moment. One is about that profitability and investor reaction. The other one is about employee engagement. Even so you finished on the employee engagement, let's first start on the question from Barry. He says, is Wall Street rewarding companies for this behavior, like long-term perspective? And if they are not, what are the practical actions that must be taken to make this change? Anu, would you like to, based on some of the research the conference board has done, respond to that first?
Sure. Yeah. So I think you can respond to that question. It's not a black and white question from my perspective. There's always a spectrum of investors and what their appetite is. I think so. It's important to look at this from a risk perspective, and if I was to have this narrative to say that investors are they look at an entity from a risk perspective and say, what's the risk returns for a particular entity with good ESG performance? That's the term they would use. And what's their probability of a risky return, because maybe the entity is too risky. So essentially what is happening is more and more investors are trying to now see, and I think COVID is a good example where they say actually, they've said supply chain resilience can affect the value of a company. Therefore, we need to be asking in our engagement with companies, how resilient are their supply chains. So when you start taking a step back again, saying when you start looking at ESG factors and how can it influence the value of a company, that's the mindset investors are coming on to. And there's a big recognition for, social issues, climate change. Of course, these do impact company values. So, and therefore what investors are doing is actually trying to prioritize, shift. And this is the notion of what they've been through over the past, from exclusion to more proactively selecting, or when they're putting together a portfolio, moving towards companies or assets which have a stronger ESG track record. So you might say, so that's one way to look at it, and saying actually yes, it is happening. Of course, you might say whether is it happening at a pace which each one of us will have a different response to that. Whether is it happening at a pace which is needed for the challenges we face. Probably the answer for that maybe is, for me personally, is no, it's not happening at that pace. But yeah, there you are. But having said that, in terms of what can be done, practical action, I think so. There's lots happening in terms of the movement. You know, it all starts with the awareness, the recognition. Initiatives like UNPRI have done a lot. You also have investor consortiums which are trying to collectively push companies to embrace, because you will always have companies on a spectrum who are more forward-looking, open to engagement, open to embracing new ideas, ESG, and there'll be some on the other side who will be more resistive. But the investors are coming together to have that dialogue, to encourage and influence towards a more proactive, forward-looking ESG strategy.
Thanks. And in my experience, when I speak to people in companies, 5 years ago, no investor was asking any sustainability questions, and now chief sustainability officers are called in all these investor calls. That, for me, is a sign that things are changing. How does that feel for you in Leo Pharma?
I mean, I certainly agree. I think that, as I mentioned at the outset, because it's quite pertinent, especially to this discussion, is we are privately owned. Nevertheless, we see something similar in terms of just what's happening in the finance sector and terms around different arrangements we have with our banks and how we can get preferential interest rates, for instance, for good sustainability performance, usually on that responsible business pillar, which is important in terms of our operations. I think that you know, from where I sit and just, you know, you mentioned risk. We really look at it from more of a trends perspective and an opportunities perspective. Or, you know, what are the mega trends that are going to come into our sector, or that are going to influence our sector in a futures perspective? And what does that mean in terms of how we innovate? And if we take health, I mean, we've seen advances in digital technologies and how that's changing how health is as a service is being distributed. And then there's the whole human side, the demographic changes, aging populations, moving populations. Again, going back to the healthcare systems and different healthcare systems in different countries and how those are being constrained or not, and what it could potentially mean in terms of how we as a pharmaceutical company can work towards enabling stronger health and better health outcomes for everyone going forward. So really your sustainability strategy setup is really about how do you navigate this uncertain future in a sense. Similarly, sort of from on that responsible business pillar is going back to employees. What does the future of work look like? So how is it that we need to invest now as companies in order to ensure that we're relevant going forward? And so for us, while we don't have those investors, we certainly see a strong business reward in order to perhaps not anticipate per se, because we don't have a crystal ball, but be able to read an ever-changing environment and understanding that environmental regulations are changing. There are climate laws coming in, and retrofitting going, you know, in the future is always going to be more expensive. And so how is it that we can have better informed investment decisions now that could give us the right return and benefit in the future?
Get it. Yeah, thanks. We have more questions coming in. One about employee engagement, as I've just said, one about pandemic preparedness, one about the integration specifically, and one about KPIs. We'll try to cover them all, but if we don't manage to cover every question, we will reply in email to you if you would like us to do so. But let's get going. So Gregory is asking, engaging employees is something our company has struggled with. Setting up green teams and or other teams devoted to sustainability practices like recycling, energy efficiency is good, but it's also important to tie employees' roles to the overall sustainability strategy of the business, e.g. net zero goals and and that's where we struggle. Franz, one for you.
Yeah, we all struggle. I think, I mean, I'd love to have the perfect answer for that. Again, I'll go behind the, every company is different. And indeed, it goes back to that issue around impact and how is it that employees can feel engaged? One, because yes, their company has good recycling programs or, energy efficiency programs, but is that really where impact is being generated? There's certainly something in terms of continuously communicating your progress transparently and engaging management and teams at multiple different levels. And then I think it's also looking at, how is it that you take this on? How is it that you can incorporate it into so many of your other narratives? So we talk a lot about strategy integration, but how is this integrated into be it your language around branding or your language around how you speak about the company, what is being spoken to at town halls. So some of the practical tactics, I would say, that we're working on now for employee engagement is working with messaging with our CEO at town halls, so that sustainability, again, isn't just something that she speaks about at a specific town hall or in response to a certain question or speaks about the business and now we talk about sustainability, but rather that the language of sustainability is weaved into the narratives when we're speaking about health and access or product development or innovation. Creating opportunities for employees to learn. We'll be setting up a sort of sustainability day towards the end of the year with lots of sort of virtual events and panel debates with speakers from universities in Copenhagen and so on, and that will be broadcast globally, and we're preparing communication packages for different affiliates where they can facilitate sustainability activities within their teams, but that relate to the strategy. And I think that's the important piece. I think that the engagement and the awareness going back to the impact piece, we can have our sort of personal sustainability project in a sense, and I've had teams sort of do, sustainability resolution goals at a personal level, and that's great. And I think it creates a lot of excitement around concepts of sustainability, and leads to that culture around it that you really want to get your employees to understand that there is a strategy and its purpose in the company. And if they're feeling a little bit distant to it, is how can they, one, just better understand it, better engage with it, and get excited about it, and that if their work is not directly linked to it, that's okay. It's not that they're not relevant, that they're, other initiatives are also critically important to the company and getting that important. But, it is one of the challenges that we're continuously working on. But we're making progress with some of these different tactical initiatives that we're implementing.
What I'm hearing you say, Francis, is that it depends a little bit also on the maturity of your journey, doesn't it? So in an early day, actually talking about plastic caps versus beakers and what have you in a company can actually distract from the integration of the overall impact of the company. But once it's really integrated, these individual initiatives can be additional motivating and employee engaging. So that's what I hear you say.
Yeah, I think that's important, because I think it's important for them to understand what it is and what it isn't. And there is a tendency to go to what is most familiar. And the plastic cups tends to be one that we all end up with. That said, I think it's important not to be dismissive either, and to incorporate and say, yes, that's interesting, that's important, great. This is where our business can have its most impact. And I think that, if I could just give one last example that also feeds to this, we're looking at doing our carbon targets, and we're looking at scope 3, which is always the most complicated. And while something like employee travel or employee commuting as two different components of scope 3 is really not where we're going to be able to make the biggest dent. It's a great way to engage employees on the broader scope 3 target by setting out surveys in terms of their travel patterns and so on, because they can relate to it. and then showing them that actually, this is how we engage suppliers, or this is what it means in terms of, some of our manufacturing practices and transport logistics, for instance. But having them involved in that process at a level that they can understand connects them to the bigger project as well. So I think it's also important to, not be dismissive, but really help them contextualize them in a respectful way that what it is that the company needs to be doing is really about impact.
Got it. I have to manage the questions at the moment because we have so many. Mark, please forgive me if I'm not raising your question first, because I think in the flow of things, Adman's question should come first. He says, integrating sustainability from a strategic level can sometimes result in greenwashing or an explicit CSR, which have impact to some degree, but are not that optimal. Can organizations make sure that the approach is more integrated into their business? Anu, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. I guess my response is that I think let me take a narrative of the fact that given the challenges we have, companies are choosing their own respective journeys, whether it's greenwashing, CSR, being on the periphery. They are able to make little changes, but actually it's not making a dent in the overall system. Again, it's not boiling the ocean, to say it this way. And the question then comes in is actually, the company needs to really reflect on why they are pursuing all of these things. If they come up with an answer that we are doing it so that we can tick a few boxes, I think so. I don't know whether they'll ever be able to integrate sustainability or be able to pursue a sustainable business strategy because they are happy with the little things they want to do. But I guess we then need a systemic way of looking at things. What are the forces which need to change outside, which can influence a company to change its way of working? And I think so. That's the wave we are talking about when we talk about, investors, for example, are seeing it through which companies are integrating and which companies are, keeping it at the periphery. At the same time, employees are also can see through now, especially in the age of information, that what the company stands for, a value, what a company stands for. So that, I think that there are indirect ways where the stakeholders are able to assess whether a company is completely integrating or keeping it on the wayside. And sooner or later, this is, actually it's catching up with companies, and those changes for integration, no matter how slow, actually we are seeing them through now.
Yeah, and we see more and more of this is happening. And Franz, you were mentioning that magic word, which I like so much, impact. Yeah? So you have to really look for where are you making a difference and where can you make a difference. Yeah? So instead of having 30 KPIs, we'll come back to the KPIs in a second, the most important ones. And I heard you say that as well.
Yeah, and that was actually the first word that came to mind when I heard the question is, you've got to focus on the impact. And by that I mean, what is the challenge that you're trying to address, or what is the value creation opportunity, and what is your solution to that? And then taking it one level further and saying, how is that solution that you're posing? Are there any challenges to it that need to be addressed? And I think that that's where the greenwashing sometimes happens, is inadvertently not looking deep enough into how it is that we're addressing some of these initiatives. If I can just give a sort of high-level concrete example, is something like digital solutions to health. They're great for remote access, for there's different awareness. I mean, there's plenty of tools, but if there's an inequality in access to the technology, when we come with a solution to a health barrier, if we're not looking at the barrier to our solution, we're ending up not having the full impact that it is that we're trying to have. And so, my recommendation to companies is, look at your challenge, look at that solution, and then try to see how you can use, your thinking to say, are we really getting the greatest value out of the solution, or are there, cross-sectoral partnerships that we need to look at in order to really enhance the value that it is that we're trying to have. So, how is it that we can look at making sure that we have greater access to our digital tool to really have the solution that we're trying to go for. And I think that going back to my point on the business models, I think that, don't let that scare you away. My point there was, yes, it has to be core. But sometimes looking at initiatives is a good way of going about it, but they have to be initiatives that really lead to systemic change. And I think that those are possible, and it enables companies to prioritize, but find those one or two initiatives where you can really have the most impact, and then build from there. And I think it's really about being honest about that. I think we can lose ourselves sometimes of the big strategies and say, oh, well, this is about circular economy, but maybe we need to simplify it and say, well, this is actually about 100% recycled materials, and sort of concretizing it to an initiative that can have a lot more impact.
Thanks. I think Fred's question is linked to this, and that's why I'm using this sequence. You improve only what you can measure, he says. What are the key KPIs for sustainability? And
I think we've talked about. It's a really nice question, but then we can discuss this for hours and hours. I think what's important is you really need to focus on the outcome and impact, and then each company will be on its own journey. And the question comes in how, depending on the issue you're trying to address, what would be how can you communicate an impact? How can you measure the impact? I think that's what would be a way to think about KPIs without going into the detail of what's a good way to measure something. I think I'm not taking that lens, but actually a good KPI is something which is focused on outcome and is also impact oriented. So that's my response.
Thanks. I always love to say in this context, don't forget the K in KPI. It's and what it stands for. A lot of people have 30 and 40 KPIs on a certain subject, and then I ask myself, is that key or isn't it key? But on that sort of little hobby horse of mine, Franz, how do you?
I mean, this is again one of the challenges that we continuously face in our practice, and I think that we all would wish that there were great ready-made methodologies that could really facilitate our ability to measure impact, because that is what we know that we want to aspire to. But I agree with Anu that one must, strongly consider what outcomes one can measure. I think that is already a huge step up from, input or output measurements, and I think that that we really need to move beyond. I think that is really something of the past, but not, get too focused on, are we actually measuring impact, but look at some of the outcomes that you're creating and maybe have some more qualitative discourses or analysis around what potential impact that could be, and that can enable to ensure that your sustainability practice is on the right track. I think that we shouldn't make sustainability an ultimate goal that one needs to be reached. It is about a direction and a way of thinking and how it is that we're prioritizing decisions in our businesses. And the KPI is there to help us make sure that we are on the right course. But I think that, and then we can use sort of an outcomes perspective with some qualitative analysis to get to that. And I agree with you that we don't need to measure everything. We really need to measure what is going to best inform our decisions. And again, that's something that's going to be bespoke to your initiative and to your company, but that all contributes to the ultimate outcome that we're trying to do, which is monitoring performance, and that we're sailing in the right direction.
Yeah, let me be a little more outspoken about this. So if you are a bank, I use that example a lot. If you are a bank and you're measuring the water consumption in your offices, that's probably not a KPI. But if you measure the footprint of your investments, your carbon footprint of your investments, that might be a relevant KPI. Is that the sort of? I
mean, I think that sort of thing. Everyone can say if your bank is in a water-stressed area, then maybe it is important. But indeed, yes, you want to stay probably more to your core to your core business functions. And going back to that model, really, we're really looking at, what is going to affect our business? Where is it that our initiative can really have the most impact to patients' well-being? And what does that mean beyond treating a chronic disease? How is it that we can enable them to have much more fulfilling lives? And that's really what we're trying to get at. But we do have some more responsible business criteria that are strategically important because it could potentially affect our ability to operate going forward. So it's very contextual. But indeed, I think again, going back to the point where, I think some of the advantages again of the private ownership is that we don't have to collect all this data to meet different reporting requirements, and we could really focus on what it is that we need to monitor. And that's really allowed us to focus on the core.
Yeah, but I think you are privileged in that sense, but that doesn't get public companies off the hook to decide what's material to them. Yeah. So anyway, Mark, I promised that I would raise your question, but we might be opening a Pandora's box, which is very, very different. And now my system has just played up on me. Let me just see that I get it here. Given that this is not the last pandemic the world will face due to climate change, what perspective would you prefer elected leaders to have in preparing for the future? So, anyone?
Wow.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that you're struggling with that question. Let me get you off the hook here. Of course, we cannot really make any sort of recommendations for policy or stuff like this. That's not part of what the conference board does. But I think what we have to say is that we see that collaboration will be an increasing subject for companies, and seeking out making sure that we advocate for a more sustainable work between companies and governments, between companies and NGOs. Would that resonate with you, lady and gentlemen?
As you were helping us get off the hook on that, and I agree with it. It's difficult for us to have policy recommendations here for such a global audience as well. I think that the word that did come to mind was idea of what can we do from the private sector, and I think that one of the things that we did see in COVID was a great willingness to come together within industry in a pre-competitive space or from a cross-sectors perspective on how is it that we can address a global crisis together. And I think that going forward in a sort of future pandemic preparedness, be it a health crisis or climate crisis or whatever we may unpredictably face, is that we are prepared as companies to be able to collaborate and contribute to finding solutions. And I think that the COVID response in the private sector, we have seen examples of that that could be built upon.
Okay, thank you so much. Franz, Gregory said, and I'll pass that on. Thank you, Franz. The idea of a sustainability day and your other suggestions to inform employees is very helpful. So I would extend that thank you to you, Franz, for giving us really good insights on what you're doing, how your journey went, and I think that that is always very helpful to hear from practitioners. But I would like to also thank Anu, because that research is based on the case studies of really leading companies in the sustainability field, and I think that triggered a lot of good questions and discussions as well. So thank you, Anu, as well. And with that, I would like to thank the audience and just point out that we have a new podcast series, and we encourage you to have a listen. You find it on our website. It's free access, and we have had some really interesting participants there. John Elkington about his new book, and also we will have discussions around the UN SDGs and human rights and supply chain and so on and so forth. So the upcoming webcasts are Community Investment Spectrum Integrating Social Impact and Purpose-Driven Companies, one in July, one in September. We have always a little break in August. Please help us to improve what we do by giving the feedback which will now come up. And thank you for listening, and thank you for our panel for giving us such great insights.